In -50 degrees Celsius cold, a desperate leopard drags her 5 tiny cubs to a man's doorstep. And what happened next shocked everyone. He thought he was opening the door to danger, but instead, he found himself at the center of a fight no one could have imagined. Why would a wild predator turn to a human for help? And what secret truth hides behind this chilling encounter? When survival, family, and fear collide in the dead of winter, one choice will decide who lives and who doesn't. What did the leopard do inside that house? And why would it change everything? Before we begin, tell me your city or country in the comments. It turns this space from a screen into a circle of real hearts. The bitter Montana wind howled through the darkness, hurling snow against Daniel Whitford's cabin with relentless fury. Inside, he sat in his worn leather armchair, staring at the crackling fireplace that barely kept the -50 degrees Celsius temperatures at bay. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls, reminders of another lonely night in his self-imposed exile. His calloused hands absently traced the worn arms of the chair, Sarah's favorite chair, before the accident. 3 years had passed since he'd lost her, but the grief still felt as fresh as the Arctic air that seeped through his window frames. A framed photo on the mantel caught his eye, his daughter Leah's high school graduation. She smiled broadly, caught between her parents in a moment of pure joy. Now their relationship had frozen over like the wilderness outside, with months passing between their brief, awkward phone calls. Daniel pushed himself up from the chair, his joints creaking in protest. Time for his nightly routine. Check the generator, ensure the pipes hadn't frozen, and make sure the emergency supplies were in order. These mundane tasks had become his anchor in a life stripped down to mere survival. The wind suddenly changed its pitch, rising to a shriek that made him pause. Living in isolation had sharpened his senses to the wilderness's language. Something was different tonight. Through the howling storm, another sound emerged, a scratching at his front door, followed by low, rumbling growls. His heart rate quickened. Bears should be hibernating in this weather, and wolves rarely approached human dwellings alone. Whatever was out there, it wasn't following the normal rules. Daniel's hand instinctively reached for his rifle, mounted on hooks above the fireplace. The familiar weight of the weapon offered little comfort as the scratching grew more insistent. Moving cautiously to the door, he positioned himself to the side, rifle ready. The growls continued, but there was something odd about them. They seemed more desperate than threatening. Then came a sound that made him question his sanity, the distinct mewling of small animals, barely audible above the storm dot against every survival instinct. Daniel inched toward the small window beside the door. The porch light illuminated a scene that stopped his breath. There, huddled against his door, was a creature straight out of a nature documentary, a snow leopard, its magnificent fur matted with ice and snow. But it wasn't alone. The big cat was dragging 5 tiny cubs, their eyes barely open, trying to shelter them from the lethal cold. The leopard's head snapped up, meeting his gaze through the window. Daniel had expected to see the fierce golden eyes of a predator, but instead found something that shook him to his core: exhaustion, desperation, and what he could only describe as a plea for help. The magnificent creature was at the end of its strength, its sides heaving with each labored breath. "This is crazy," Daniel muttered to himself, his grip tightening on the rifle. Snow leopards weren't even native to North America. This had to be some sort of stress-induced hallucination. Yet the scratching continued, weaker now, as the mother leopard collapsed onto his porch, her body curling protectively around her cubs. The sight triggered something deep within Daniel, breaking through years of carefully constructed emotional walls. In the mother's desperate attempt to save her babies, he saw a mirror of his own lost family, of Sarah's fierce protective love, of the connection he'd severed with Leah. His hands trembled as he set the rifle aside. "I must be losing." "My mind," he whispered, reaching for the door handle. The bitter wind struck him like a physical blow as he pulled the door open, causing him to stagger back. The leopard raised her head weakly, her pale eyes fixed on him. She made no aggressive move, didn't bare her teeth. She simply waited, as if understanding that this moment would determine her cub's survival. Daniel held his breath as he stepped back, creating space in his doorway. "Come on," he said softly, hardly believing his own actions. "Get those little ones out of the cold." For a moment, nothing moved except the swirling snow. Then, with the last of her strength, the mother leopard rose. With gentle pulls and nudges, she guided her cubs over the threshold, their tiny bodies trembling from the cold. She followed them inside, her movements speaking of complete exhaustion, before collapsing again just inside the door. Daniel quickly closed the door against the howling storm, his heart pounding. He now stood in his cabin, with 6 wild animals, one of them a full-grown apex predator. The mother leopard's eyes remained fixed on him, alert despite her exhaustion, watching his every move as her cubs huddled against her. The surreal nature of the situation struck him as he stood there, his back pressed against the door. Here he was, a man who had chosen isolation to escape the pain of human connection, suddenly thrust into the role of protector for this desperate family. The irony wasn't lost on him. Moving slowly, telegraph his movements, Daniel retrieved some old blankets from a chest. The mother leopard's eyes tracked him, but she made no aggressive moves as he carefully placed the blankets within her reach. Her focus seemed entirely on her cubs, who were already beginning to warm up in the cabin's relative warmth. As Daniel watched the family from a careful distance, something shifted in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried under grief and isolation. The mother's unwavering devotion to her cubs, her willingness to trust a human when she had no other choice, spoke to something fundamental about survival and connection. He sank into his chair, keeping a respectful distance from his unexpected guests. The rifle remained where he'd left it, untouched. Instead of fear, he felt an odd sense of purpose stirring within him. For the first time in 3 years, his cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like a sanctuary. The storm raged on outside, but inside, an unlikely group of survivors huddled in the warmth. Daniel watched as the cubs, growing bolder in the safety of the cabin, began to explore their immediate surroundings, never straying far from their mother. Their tiny paws made soft padding sounds on his wooden floor, a strange but not unwelcome addition to the usual silence of his nights. The mother leopard's breathing had steadied, though she remained alert, dividing her attention between her cubs and the human who had granted them shelter. In her presence, Daniel felt the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crack. He had turned away from the world after losing Sarah, had pushed away his own daughter, believing that isolation would protect him from further pain. Yet here was this wild creature, teaching him about trust and connection in the midst of desperate circumstances. As the night deepened, Daniel found himself speaking softly to his unusual guests, his voice rough from disuse. "You're safe here," he told them, though he knew they couldn't understand his words. "We'll figure this out somehow." The promise felt weighty on his tongue, but also right. The first real commitment he'd made to anything since Sarah's death. The mother leopard's eyes began to drift closed, her exhaustion finally winning out over her vigilance. Her cubs were already asleep, tiny bodies rising and falling with their peaceful breaths. Daniel remained in his chair, standing guard over this extraordinary family that had literally appeared on his doorstep. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on the Montana wilderness, but inside the cabin, something had fundamentally changed. In one impossible moment, Daniel's carefully constructed isolation had been shattered by a mother's desperate gamble for her children's survival. As he watched over his sleeping guests, he couldn't help but wonder if perhaps he wasn't the only one offering sanctuary. Maybe these unexpected visitors were offering him a kind of salvation as well, against every survival instinct. Daniel unlatched the door. The wind nearly tore it from his grip as he pulled it open, but what he saw made him forget the biting cold entirely. There on his snow-covered porch stood a snow leopard, a creature so improbable in Montana that he briefly wondered if isolation had finally broken his mind. The magnificent animal swayed on its feet, its once thick fur matted and thin in places. Behind her, 5 tiny cubs huddled together, their small bodies nearly buried in the driving snow. The mother's pale eyes met Daniel's, and in that moment, he saw something that shook him to his core, not the fierce wildness he expected, but exhaustion, desperation, and an intelligence that seemed almost human. Without growling or showing any aggression, the leopard took a tentative step forward. Her cubs followed, stumbling on weak legs. Daniel found himself backing away, rifle still in hand but pointed at the floor. The leopard family moved into the warmth of his cabin with surprising dignity, despite their obvious distress. Once inside, the mother leopard herded her cubs toward the fireplace, keeping herself between them and Daniel. Her eyes never left him, watching his every move with cautious attention. The cubs, barely larger than house cats, pressed against their mother's side, shivering violently. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing. Every practical consideration screamed at him to drive these dangerous wild animals back into the storm. But as he watched the cubs struggling to warm themselves, Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Kindness isn't a weakness, Danny," she used to say. "It's the strongest choice we can make." Slowly, carefully, he set his rifle down on the kitchen table, making sure the leopard could see his movements. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than his unusual guests. "Okay." The mother leopard's ears twitched at his voice, but she remained focused on warming her cubs. Daniel moved deliberately to the storage chest where he kept extra blankets. The leopard's muscles tensed as he approached, but she made no aggressive move. He placed several thick wool blankets within her reach, then backed away. With surprising gentleness, the mother leopard used her nose to arrange the blankets around her cubs. The sight stirred something in Daniel's chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him of late nights when Leah was sick, how Sarah would arrange the blankets just so, making sure their daughter was comfortable. His gaze drifted to the kitchen. These animals needed more than just warmth. Moving slowly to avoid startling them, he opened his refrigerator. Inside was some leftover venison from his last hunting trip. The leopard's head snapped up at the smell of meat, but she didn't leave her cubs. Daniel placed several chunks of meat on a plate and set it halfway between himself and the leopard family. The mother's eyes darted between him and the offering, clearly torn between hunger and caution. Finally, necessity won out. She rose smoothly and approached the plate, her movements still graceful despite her weakened state. As she ate, Daniel noticed details he'd missed in the chaos of their arrival. Old scars marked her flanks, telling stories of past struggles. Her paw prints left bloody marks on his floor. She'd been walking on ice and frozen ground for far too long. The cubs, now slightly warmer, began to stir more actively, their tiny faces peeking out from the blankets. "What happened to you?" Daniel murmured, not expecting an answer. "How did you end up so far from home?" The leopard paused in her eating, meeting his gaze again. There was something in those pale eyes that made his throat tight, a wild dignity, yes, but also trust. This powerful predator had chosen his doorstep, had risked everything by bringing her cubs to a human for help. He moved to add more wood to the fire, careful to telegraph his movements. The flames jumped higher, casting warm light over the strange tableau: a solitary man, a mother leopard, and 5 cubs slowly returning to life in the heat of the fire. The wind outside seemed more distant now, less threatening. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel's cabin felt like more than just a place to hide from the world. These creatures needed him. Their presence had broken through the protective shell of his isolation, forcing him to feel something beyond his own pain. Fear still churned in his gut. These were wild animals, after all, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. The mother leopard finished eating and returned to her cubs, settling down among the blankets. Her eyes remained alert, but her posture had relaxed slightly. One by one, the cubs began to nurse, their small bodies finally warm enough to focus on their hunger. Daniel sat in his chair, maintaining a respectful distance. He watched as the leopard tended to her young, her actions full of a mother's fierce devotion. It struck him then how similar her determination was to Sarah's strength, to the way she had fought for their family until the very end. The realization brought tears to his eyes. The first he'd allowed himself in months. He had retreated from life after Sarah's death, choosing the numbness of isolation over the pain of connection. But now, watching this wild mother risk everything to save her cubs, he felt the stirrings of something new. Or perhaps something old, waking up after a long winter's sleep. He could no longer pretend he was truly alone in the world. These creatures had chosen him, trusted him, despite every reason not to. Their presence demanded a response, not just for tonight, but for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The thought terrified him, but it also filled him with a strange sort of peace. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin, something had fundamentally changed. Daniel watched as the cubs drifted off to sleep, their mother maintaining her vigilant guard. He knew his life would never be the same after this night. The simple routines of his solitary existence had been shattered, replaced by a responsibility he hadn't sought, but couldn't deny. The fire crackled softly, and Daniel settled deeper into his chair. For the first time in years, he felt truly awake, truly present in his own life. Whatever came next, he had made his choice. These improbable visitors were under his protection now, and he would face the consequences of that decision when morning came, 3 days after the leopards arrived. Daniel had been careful about concealing their presence, but the heavy snowfall that had initially hidden their tracks couldn't last forever. As the weather cleared, he noticed fresh human footprints circling his property, stopping at various points where the leopard family had left their marks in the snow. The morning sun cast long shadows across his cabin's worn wooden floor as Daniel watched the mother leopard nurse her cubs near the warmth of the fireplace. He'd taken to calling her Shadow, though he tried not to name them, knowing they weren't pets. The cubs had grown stronger over the past days, their tiny bodies filling out thanks to the meat he'd shared from his winter stores. A distant engine sound made Daniel's heart skip. He moved to the window, staying behind the curtain as he peered out. A black pickup truck crawled along the snow-covered road that led to his property. 2 men sat in the cab, and even from this distance, Daniel could see they carried rifles. Mother Leopard's head snapped up, her ears twitching at the sound. She gathered her cubs with gentle nudges, herding them toward the bedroom where they'd made their den beneath his bed. Daniel had never seen an animal show such careful intelligence. She understood danger as well as he did. The truck stopped at his gate, and Daniel recognized one of the men who stepped out, Mike Patterson, a local hunter who occasionally did work for Conrad Hensley. The sight of him made Daniel's stomach turn. If Hensley was involved, this was worse than random curiosity. Daniel grabbed his coat and headed outside before they could approach the cabin. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked to meet them, hoping his presence might deter a closer inspection. "Morning," he called out, keeping his voice neutral. "Something I can help you with?" Mike shifted uncomfortably, but his companion, a harder-looking man Daniel didn't know, stepped forward. "Mr. Hensley sent us to check the area. There've been reports of unusual tracks. Large cat prints. Ring any bells?" Daniel shook his head, maintaining a carefully blank expression. "Haven't seen anything unusual. Probably just a mountain lion passing through." The stranger's eyes narrowed. These tracks weren't from any mountain lion. Mr. Hensley's quite interested in what might be prowling around here. Well, it's my property you're prowling around, Daniel said firmly. And I don't recall giving permission for that. Mike, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed, but his companion just smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Hensley asked us to give you his card. He'd like to talk business. The man held out a cream-colored business card. Daniel took it reluctantly, reading the embossed text. Conrad Hensley, Hensley Ranch and Hunting Enterprises. Tell him I'm not interested in business, Daniel said, pocketing the card. He said you might say that. The man glanced toward the cabin. He also said to mention he's got friends in the Fish and Wildlife Service. Any unusual predators in the area need to be properly handled. The threat was clear. Daniel felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. Like I said, nothing unusual here. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do. The men returned to their truck, but Daniel could feel their eyes on him as they drove away. He waited until they were out of sight before hurrying back inside. The mother leopard emerged from the bedroom, her pale eyes meeting his with what seemed like shared concern. Daniel ran his hands through his graying hair, mind racing. He knew Conrad Hensley by reputation, a wealthy rancher who'd built an empire on trophy hunting, using his money and influence to push for fewer restrictions on hunting predators. The man treated the wilderness like his personal playground, and anything that moved through it as his potential prize. Over the next few days, more vehicles drove past his property than he'd seen in the past year. Some stopped to take pictures of tracks in the snow. Others, more worrying, carried men with rifles and tracking equipment. Daniel began keeping his rifle closer at hand and spent hours concealing any signs of the leopard's presence. The mother leopard seemed to understand the need for secrecy. She kept her cubs quiet and hidden, only letting them play in the main room late at night when no one could see through the windows. Daniel found himself amazed by her intelligence and grew increasingly determined to protect them. 1 week after the men's visit, a sleek black SUV pulled up to his gate. Daniel watched through his binoculars as Conrad Hensley himself stepped out. Even at this distance, the man's presence commanded attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive winter gear, he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Daniel met him at the gate, determined to keep him away from the cabin. Hensley's handshake was too firm, his smile too practiced. "Mr. Whitford," Hensley said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I've been hoping to speak with you personally." "Your men already delivered your message," Daniel replied. "I'm not interested." Hensley's smile didn't waver. "I think you might be once you hear what I'm offering. My sources tell me you're housing some unusual guests. Rare ones, the kind that could cause a lot of trouble for someone living alone. Out here, your sources are wrong. Come now, Mr. Whitford, we both know better." Hensley gestured at the surrounding wilderness. "This is my territory, has been for 20 years. Nothing happens here without my knowledge. Nothing survives here without my permission." Daniel felt his anger rising but kept his voice level. "Last I checked, this was public land, and my property is private." "Everything has a price," Hensley said, pulling out a checkbook. "Name yours. For the animals and your silence about where they came from." The implication hit Daniel like a physical blow. The mother leopard's desperate arrival, her presence so far from her natural habitat, Hensley knew something about it. Perhaps everything about it. "Not interested," Daniel said again, more firmly this time. "And if anything happens to me, or anything on my property, I've got friends too. Friends who'd be very interested in why snow leopards are showing up in Montana." Something dangerous flickered in Hensley's eyes, but his smile remained fixed. "Think about it, Mr. Whitford. A man in your position, alone, cut off from the world, should consider his options carefully. I'll be in touch." As Hensley's SUV disappeared down the road, Daniel leaned against the gate, his heart pounding. Through the cabin window, he could see the mother leopard watching, her cubs safely hidden away. He knew now that he couldn't simply wait this out. Hensley wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Inside, Daniel sat heavily in his chair by the fire. The mother leopard approached, settling near his feet with a grace that belied her size. One of her cubs peeked out from the bedroom, squeaking softly until she called it over with a gentle chuff. Looking down at them, Daniel felt the weight of his decision. He'd chosen to help them that first desperate night, and now he had to see it through. Somehow he had to protect them from a man who seemed to own everything and everyone in the valley. A man who Daniel strongly suspected was responsible for their presence here in the first place. The mother leopard's eyes met his, and in them, he saw the same fierce determination he felt growing in his own heart. Whatever Hensley had planned, whatever resources he might bring to bear, Daniel would not let him near this family. Some things, he realized, were worth fighting for, even if you had to fight alone. The confrontation Daniel had dreaded came 3 days after Hensley's visit. This time, the black SUV didn't stop at the gate. It plowed straight through the snow to his front door, and Conrad Hensley emerged with 2 armed men flanking him. Daniel stood on his porch, rifle visible but pointed down. The mother leopard and her cubs were safely hidden in the root cellar. He'd prepared after Hensley's first visit. "This has gone on long enough, Whitford," Hensley called out, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "That animal is a threat to every ranch in the valley. What happens when it runs out of whatever food you're giving it? When it starts hunting livestock? Or worse?" "She's not a threat," Daniel said firmly. "She's just trying to protect her cubs." Hensley's face hardened. "Cubs? Even better. Hand them over, and I'll ensure they're properly contained." "It's the responsible thing to do." "Responsible?" Daniel felt his anger rising. Like whoever was responsible for bringing them here in the first place. A dangerous smile crossed Hensley's face. "Careful, Whitford. You're making accusations you can't back up. This is your last chance to do this the easy way. After this, things get complicated." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. You're one man living alone, far from help. Accidents happen in weather like this. Cabins burn. People disappear. Why risk everything for some animals?" Daniel's finger tightened on his rifle. "Get off my property." Hensley shrugged, but his eyes were cold. "Have it your way. But remember, I tried to be reasonable." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh. And Whitford? Better check your generator. Nights are getting colder." After they left, Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he could barely lower his rifle. He knew what Hensley meant. Without the generator, the temperature in the cabin would plummet. The leopards wouldn't survive, and neither would he. Inside, he paced the cabin floor. The mother leopard emerged from the cellar, sensing his distress. She watched him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. He couldn't fight this alone anymore. With trembling fingers, Daniel pulled out his phone. He stared at the number he hadn't dialed in over 2 years. His daughter, Leah. The thought of calling her made his chest tight with shame and regret. After her mother died, he'd pushed her away, retreated into his grief until the distance between them seemed impossible to cross. But she was studying wildlife biology. She would know what to do, how to protect these animals legally. If she would even talk to him. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Dad?" Her voice was guarded, uncertain. "Leah," his throat felt dry. I need your help." The silence that followed felt endless. Then, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but..." He glanced at the leopard. "I have a situation here, something you need to see. It's about wildlife conservation, your field of study." "What kind of situation?" He took a deep breath. "A snow leopard with cubs. They're in danger." And I don't know how to protect them. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Professional interest overcame personal hesitation. Snow leopards? In Montana? That's impossible. I'm looking at one right now. Don't move them, she said quickly. Don't tell anyone else. I can come tomorrow, first thing. Thank you. He managed out another pause. I'm not doing this for you, she said quietly. I'm doing it for them. I know. The words hurt, but he deserved them. But thank you anyway. After hanging up, Daniel sat heavily in his chair. The mother leopard approached, resting her head on his knee in an unprecedented display of trust. Tomorrow he would face his daughter for the first time in years. But tonight, he had preparations to make. Whatever Hensley was planning, he had. To be ready, Leah's truck pulled up to the cabin early the next morning, her tires crunching on the frozen gravel. Daniel watched from the window as she gathered her equipment, a camera, notebook, and what looked like scientific instruments. His heart hammered against his ribs. She looked so much like her mother. The knock came sharp and professional. When? Daniel opened the door. Leah stood there with her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Where is it? She asked, bypassing any greeting. In the back room, Daniel replied quietly. She's protective of the cubs, so we should. I know how to approach wild animals. Dad, Leah cut him off, her voice clipped. She softened slightly as she added, that's literally what I study. They moved carefully to the bedroom doorway. The leopard mother raised her head, watching them with intelligent eyes. Her cubs were nursing, tiny bodies pressed against her side. Leah's scientific detachment crumbled instantly. Oh my God, she whispered. She raised her camera slowly, documenting everything with trembling hands. This is incredible. She's severely undernourished, but, she trailed off, scribbling rapid notes. A knock at the front door made them both jump. Daniel relaxed when he recognized Samuel Ortiz's weathered face through the window. He let his neighbor in, grateful for the buffer of his steady presence. Brought some meat from the storehouse, Samuel said, holding up a package. His eyes fell on Leah. Well, if it isn't little Leah Whitford, though not so little anymore. Leah managed a small smile. Hi, Mr. Ortiz. She turned back to her father. This leopard shouldn't be here. They're native to Central Asia. The fact that she's here with cubs, she shook her head. Someone brought her here illegally. Conrad, Daniel said grimly. He's been importing exotic animals for his hunting. Schemes for years. Everyone knows it, but no one can prove it. Then we'll prove it now, Leah said firmly. She pulled out more equipment. I'm going to document everything. Weight estimates, condition, behavior patterns. If we can establish a pattern of illegal trafficking, Samuel moved to the kitchen. Preparing the meat. Conrad's got friends in high places, he warned. But I'm with you both. That man's caused enough damage. As Leah worked, Daniel watched her confidence and expertise with a mixture of pride and regret. She'd grown into this capable woman while he was hiding from the world. One of the cubs wobbled over to investigate her equipment, and Leah's face lit up with pure joy. They're about 6 weeks old, she explained, almost forgetting her guardedness with Daniel in her excitement. See how they're starting to explore? But they're still completely dependent on their mother. She looked up at Daniel. You probably saved their lives letting them in. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken parallels. Daniel cleared his throat. I couldn't let them die out there. No, Leah said softly. I guess you couldn't. She returned to her notes, but something in the tension between them had shifted. They spent the day developing plans. Samuel would help reinforce the cabin's weak points. Leah would compile evidence and reach out to wildlife protection contacts. Daniel would maintain his guard, watching for Conrad's next move. As evening approached, Leah packed up her equipment. I'll need to come back tomorrow, she said. There's more data I need to collect. Daniel nodded, afraid to push for more. But, as she reached the door, Leah turned back. "Dad?" Her voice was uncertain. "Why did you really let them in that night?" Daniel looked at the leopard mother, now cleaning her cubs with gentle strokes of her tongue. I think I was tired of watching life pass by while I hid from it." Leah's eyes glistened. She gave a quick nod and left, but Daniel felt something crack in the wall between them. Like the leopard family huddled in his home, Hope had found an unexpected shelter in the winter of their estrangement. The first shot crackled through the darkness like breaking ice. Daniel jolted awake, his heart hammering. Below his bed, the leopard mother growled, her cubs whimpering in fear. More gunfire peppered the night. Through the frosted windows, flashlight beams swept across the property. Daniel grabbed his rifle and ducked low, crawling to where Leah was already crouched by the window. "I count at least 4 of them," she whispered. "They're trying to scare us out." Samuel's truck roared up the access road, his headlights catching 2 figures who scattered into the trees. He pulled up behind the cabin, using his vehicle as cover while he made his way to the back door. Daniel let him in quickly. "Conrad's men," Samuel confirmed, brushing snow from his coat. "Been watching them gather at the old Miller place since sundown. Figured they'd try something tonight." Another shot rang out, closer this time. One of the cubs let out a frightened cry, and the mother leopard's growl deepened. Leah crawled to the bed, speaking softly to calm them. "We need to document everything," she said, pulling out her phone to record the gunfire. "But there's something else you both need to see." She retrieved her laptop from her backpack, opening files while bullets continued to strike the cabin's outer walls. "I've been digging into Conrad's business dealings. Look at these shipping manifests I found." She turned the screen toward them. "He's been importing exotic predators for years, tigers, lions, leopards. All supposedly for private game reserves, but the numbers don't add up. Animals disappear from his records, but there's no documentation of their deaths or transfers." Daniel studied the documents, his jaw tightening. "He's been releasing them into the wilderness?" "For hunting sport." "Exactly," Leah nodded. "And not just that. These temperature graphs show how climate changes have pushed snow leopards out of their normal territories. But this mother? She matches the description of one that vanished from Conrad's latest shipment 3 months ago. She didn't just wander. Here by accident, she escaped from him." Samuel swore under his breath. "That explains why he's so desperate to get her back. She's evidence of his trafficking operation." A window shattered in the kitchen, and they all ducked lower. The leopard mother herded her cubs deeper under the bed, her pale eyes reflecting the dim light. "We've got to hold out until morning," Daniel said grimly. "Leah, keep gathering evidence. Samuel, help me secure the perimeter." Through the long night, Conrad's men maintained their siege. They'd fire, wait, then fire again, a psychological warfare meant to wear them down. But with each attack, Leah documented everything: times, directions, shell casings that landed on the porch. She also continued piecing together Conrad's paper trail, uncovering more connections between his hunting operations and the displaced predators appearing in the region. "His whole empire is built on this," she explained during a quiet moment. "Near dawn, he brings in exotic animals, releases them, then charges rich clients fortunes to hunt them. When accidents happen, he uses them to argue for looser hunting restrictions. It's all connected." Daniel watched his daughter work, pride mixing with his worry. The leopard mother had emerged from hiding and sat near them, as if understanding they were fighting for her safety. Her cubs peeked out occasionally, quick and nervous. "The animals aren't the only ones he's hurt," Samuel added quietly. 3 hikers died last year in what they called a mountain lion attack. Never did find that lion. Because it wasn't a mountain lion, Leah said, pulling up another file. "The bite patterns in the photos don't match any native predators." but they do match the jaw structure of a Bengal tiger, like the one missing from Conrad's February shipment. Dawn began to pale the windows. The shooting had stopped, but they could still see figures moving in the tree line. Conrad's men weren't leaving. They were regrouping. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The evidence Leah had uncovered transformed their stand from a simple protection of injured wildlife into something far larger. They weren't just fighting for one leopard family anymore. They were threatening to expose years of criminal activity that had led to both animal and human casualties. The morning light revealed the full scope of Leah's discoveries, spread across the cabin's worn kitchen table. Daniel stared at the damning evidence: shipping manifests, forged permits, and disturbing photographs of exotic animals in makeshift holding pens on Conrad's property. "This is what drove her here," Leah explained, pointing to a map marked with illegal wildlife trafficking routes. Conrad's operations disrupted their natural migration patterns. The mother leopard had nowhere else to go. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "We're getting this out today." He grabbed his camera and began methodically photographing every document, every scrap of evidence. Leah organized the physical papers into weatherproof folders while Samuel kept watch from the window. The leopard mother paced nearby, her cubs following in a cautious line. She seemed to sense their urgency, her pale eyes alert to their movements. Daniel paused to watch them, struck by how the smallest cub always stayed closest to its mother. It reminded him painfully of Leah as a child, before grief had torn them apart. The attack came without warning. First, the acrid smell of smoke. Then Samuel's shout from the porch, "They're setting fires." Daniel rushed outside to see multiple blazes erupting in the surrounding forest. Conrad's men had positioned themselves strategically, using the wind to drive the flames toward the cabin. The crackle of burning wood filled the air as orange flames climbed the drought-dry trees. "Get everything inside," Daniel ordered, helping Samuel gather their outdoor supplies. "Leah, secure that evidence." The smoke thickened rapidly, carried by the strong wind. Inside, the leopard mother grew agitated, herding her cubs into the furthest corner. The fire had created a deadly fence, cutting off their escape routes one by one. "They're trying to smoke us out," Samuel said grimly, closing the last window against the advancing heat. "Or worse." Leah clutched the folders containing their evidence. "We can't let Conrad destroy this. Too many animals will suffer if we don't expose him." The cabin grew stifling as the fire drew closer. Daniel wet blankets and stuffed them under doors while Samuel filled every container with water. The leopard mother's cubs whimpered, pressing against her as smoke began seeping through the cabin's old walls. Through the windows, they could see Conrad's men watching from the safety of their vehicles, waiting to pick off any fleeing animals or people. The trap was complete. The root cellar, Daniel suddenly remembered. It's not much, but it might buy us time. He pulled up the trapdoor in the kitchen floor, revealing the small storage space below. Cool air wafted up, a momentary relief from the increasing heat. The leopard mother understood immediately. She nudged her cubs toward the opening, and they scrambled down one by one. Leah followed with the evidence, while Samuel gathered what supplies he could carry. Daniel made one last check of the cabin, grabbing photos of his late wife and Leah as a child. The heat had become unbearable, smoke burning his eyes and throat. Outside, trees crashed as the fire consumed them. They huddled in the cellar, listening to the inferno rage above. The leopard mother kept her cubs close, remarkably calm despite their dire situation. Daniel watched as Leah reached out slowly, touching the great cat's fur for the first time. The leopard allowed it, as if acknowledging they were all in this fight together. "Conrad's gone too far this time," Samuel said, his voice rough from smoke. "Setting forest fires? That's not just illegal hunting anymore." Daniel nodded grimly. The fire roared overhead, and embers began falling through cracks in the cellar ceiling. They weren't safe here, but for now, it was their only option. The heat pressed down, making each breath a struggle, while the leopard mother's pale eyes reflected the dancing flames above. Their survival, and the chance to expose Conrad's crimes, now depended on outlasting the inferno he had created to destroy them. The smoke grew unbearable in the cellar. Daniel could hear Leah's labored breathing beside him, feel Samuel's grip weakening on his shoulder. The leopard mother's eyes caught the dim lantern light, reflecting an intelligence that seemed to ask, "What now?" Daniel pressed his face close to the cellar door's edge, feeling for air currents. A slight breeze touched his cheek from the northwest. The fire must be weakening there. "Listen," he said, his voice rough from smoke. "There's a creek bed about 50 yards past the old oak. If we can reach it, the fire will have jumped it," Samuel warned. "Maybe, but it's our best chance." Daniel turned to his daughter. "Leah, can you make it?" She nodded, though her face was pale beneath the soot. "The leopards will follow their mother. She knows we're trying to help." The cellar door was scorching hot when Daniel touched it. He wrapped his hands in his jacket and heaved it open. A wave of superheated air rolled over them, but the worst of the flames had moved past. The night sky glowed orange through the thick smoke. "Stay low," Daniel ordered. "Follow me exactly." They emerged into hell. The cabin was completely gone, reduced to burning rubble. Every tree within sight was either burning or smoking, casting eerie shadows through the smoke. The heat pressed against them like a physical wall. Daniel led them in a crouching run, choosing each step carefully through the burning debris. Behind him, he heard Leah's quick breaths and Samuel's heavier footfalls. The leopard mother herded her cubs along, keeping them moving despite their frightened mules. A burning branch crashed down inches from Leah. Daniel yanked her forward just in time, pulling her against his chest as sparks showered around them. Their eyes met in that moment of shared terror and relief. Father and daughter, finally understanding each other through crisis. "I've got you," he said hoarsely. "I won't let go this time." Tears cut clean tracks through the soot on Leah's face. She squeezed his hand and pressed on. They reached the oak tree, now a towering torch in the night. The creek bed lay just beyond, a shallow cut through the earth that might offer shelter from the inferno. Daniel helped Samuel down the steep bank, then turned to assist Leah. The leopard mother surprised them all by leaping down gracefully, then standing at the bottom to catch her cubs one by one as they tumbled down. The creek itself was barely a trickle, but its banks rose 6 feet on either side. They huddled there, pressed against the damp earth, as the fire roared overhead. The heat was still intense, but they could breathe. Hours passed. Gradually, the roar of flames diminished to a crackle, then to isolated pops and hisses. When dawn finally broke, it revealed a landscape transformed to ash and smoke. But they had survived. Daniel looked at his daughter, curled up against his side with dirt and soot streaking her face. She'd shown such courage, such determination. He'd missed so many years, retreating into his grief while she grew up without him. But watching her help tend the leopard cubs, seeing her fierce commitment to protecting them, he felt a surge of pride and hope. "We can't let Conrad get away with this," Leah said, meeting his gaze. "We won't." Daniel's voice was firm. "We have your research, your photos, the evidence of illegal trafficking. It's time to take this to the authorities." Samuel nodded grimly. "I'll back you both. Conrad's gone too far this time." The leopard mother watched them with those knowing eyes, as if she understood that these humans were fighting for more than just her family now. They were fighting for justice, for redemption, for the chance to heal what was broken, both in the wild and in themselves. Daniel stood, helping Leah to her feet. The sun rose higher, burning away the last wisps of smoke. His home was gone, but he had found something more valuable, a purpose beyond mere survival, and the daughter he'd almost lost forever. The frozen river valley stretched before them like a white prison. Walls of ice-crusted rock rose on either side, leaving no escape route. Daniel's breath came out in quick, visible puffs as he and Leah made their way carefully across the snow-packed ground. The leopard mother and her cubs followed close behind, their paw prints marking the pristine surface. A sharp crack echoed through the valley. Daniel's heart stopped as Conrad's voice boomed from above. "That's far enough, Whitford." Conrad stood on an outcropping 20 feet above them, rifle aimed steadily downward. Before Daniel could react, 2 more men emerged from behind rocks, cutting off their retreat. In one fluid motion, Conrad descended the slope, never lowering his weapon. "Leah, get behind me," Daniel said quietly, but Conrad was faster. He grabbed Leah roughly by the arm, pressing the rifle barrel against her temple. "Don't move, old man," Conrad snarled, "or your daughter dies right here." Daniel froze, his hands raised. The leopard mother growled low in her throat, but stayed back with her cubs, reading the deadly tension in the air. "You really thought you could expose me?" Conrad's laugh was bitter and cold as the surrounding ice. "Everything I've built, my entire empire, you think I'd let you destroy it all?" Leah struggled against his grip. "The authorities already have copies of everything," she spat. "You're finished either way." Conrad's face twisted with rage. He jabbed the rifle harder against her head, making her wince. "Then I've got nothing left to lose, do I?" Daniel's mind raced. The distance between them was too great to rush Conrad without endangering Leah. The other men had their weapons trained on him. One wrong move would be fatal, but nature had its own plans. The leopard mother, sensing the threat to her cubs, had been inching forward through the snow. Now, with explosive force, she launched herself at Conrad's back. Her powerful jaws clamped down on his shoulder as her weight drove him forward. The rifle went off, the shot going wild as Leah wrenched herself free. Daniel didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tackling Conrad as the leopard released him. They rolled across the frozen ground, trading desperate blows. Conrad's fist caught Daniel's jaw, sending stars exploding across his vision. But Daniel had years of construction work behind his punches, and his fist connected solidly with Conrad's nose. Blood sprayed across the white snow as they grappled. The cold bit into them as they fought, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Conrad was younger, but Daniel had the strength of purpose driving him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about family, about making things right. Conrad managed to get on top, his hands closing around Daniel's throat. Black spots danced at the edges of Daniel's vision as he struggled for air. With the last of his strength, he brought his knee up hard into Conrad's side. The rancher's grip loosened just enough. Daniel rolled them both, getting the leverage he needed. His fists came down again and again until Conrad stopped fighting back. The rancher lay there in the blood-stained snow, barely conscious, all his arrogance finally beaten out of him. The other men had fled when the leopard attacked. Now silence filled the valley, broken only by harsh breathing and the soft padding of paws through snow. The leopard mother stood watch over her cubs, her pale eyes fixed on the defeated Conrad. Daniel's hands shook as he checked Leah for injuries. "Are you okay?" he asked hoarsely. She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks as she hugged him fiercely. "I'm okay, Dad. We're okay." The next few days passed in a blur of official activity. Police vehicles and wildlife authorities swarmed the previously quiet wilderness, their presence marking the end of Conrad's reign of terror. Daniel watched from his porch as they collected evidence, his ribs still tender from the fight, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. Leah stood beside him, clutching a thick folder of documentation. Her photographs and research notes had proven invaluable, showing not only Conrad's recent attacks but also tracing his history of illegal exotic animal trafficking. The evidence was damning: transport records, falsified permits, and testimonies from former employees who'd finally found the courage to speak. "The state prosecutor says it's an airtight case," Leah said, her voice full of quiet satisfaction. "They're charging him with multiple federal wildlife violations, attempted murder, and conspiracy. He won't be hurting any more animals or people." Daniel squeezed her shoulder, proud of her determination and expertise. "You did good, kiddo. Real good." Inside the cabin, the leopard mother watched the proceedings with characteristic calm, her cubs tumbling around her healing flank. The wildlife veterinarian who'd been checking on them daily had declared them healthy and growing strong. Soon, they would be ready to return to the wild. The news of the unusual case spread quickly through academic circles. Leah's detailed observations of the snow leopard family's behavior attracted attention from leading researchers. She'd been offered a position in a prestigious conservation program, recognition that brought a flush of pride to her cheeks when she told Daniel about it. "They want me to lead a study on predator rehabilitation," she explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "But I'll still be based nearby. We won't lose touch again." "No," Daniel agreed softly, "we won't." The morning they chose to release the leopards dawned clear and cold. Daniel and Leah hiked deep into the wilderness, following the mother cat as she carried one cub at a time to a new den she'd selected. Each time she returned for another baby, her trust in them remained unshaken. Daniel's throat felt tight as he watched the last cub disappear into the rocks. The leopard mother paused, turning to face them one final time. Her pale eyes held his gaze, and in them he saw something that mirrored his own journey, from desperate survival to healing, from isolation to connection. "Thank you," he whispered. Again, knowing she understood. She blinked slowly, then vanished into the wilderness that was her true home. Daniel and Leah stood together in the deep snow, watching the empty rocks where the leopards had disappeared. The silence felt different now, not the hollow quiet of loneliness, but the peaceful stillness of completion. "I missed you, Dad," Leah said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. "All those years, I missed you too." Daniel turned to face his daughter, seeing in her features echoes of her mother, but also her own fierce strength. "I was lost for a long time after your mom died. Couldn't see past my own pain. But this," he gestured at the wilderness around them, "helping these creatures, working with you, it woke something up in me, something I thought was dead." Leah hugged him tightly, and he held on, marveling at how much had changed. The broken man who'd hidden from the world was gone. In his place stood someone who'd remembered how to care, how to fight for what mattered, how to love. They began the walk home together, their boots crunching in the snow. Above them, the sun painted the Montana mountains gold, and somewhere in those peaks, a family of leopards moved through their new territory. Wild and free. Daniel felt truly alive again, his heart full with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest healing comes from reaching past our own pain to protect others. The wilderness that had once been his prison had become his salvation, and the daughter he'd pushed away was now his strongest ally. If this story warmed you tonight, subscribe and leave a single line that stayed with you. Your words shape tomorrow's story.